Well, when you hear of pro-life, I think there's a lot of maybe confusions or ideas that are going to pop into someone's head. If they're coming more from the pro-choice side, you often hear this claim that pro-lifers are just pro-forced birth. All they care about is making the woman give birth, but don't care about the woman or the family or afterbirth or what happens. And I think we realize some problems with that, as well as maybe some pro-lifers sometimes are focused on different things. And not that one is wrong to focus on, they all have their value, but maybe we focus more on making a defense for the unborn and making logical, philosophical, theological arguments that the unborn are valuable human beings deserving of protection, which is important to do. Maybe we focus on the pro-choice arguments and how to respond to bad logic, and that's also important. But maybe one of the lesser known areas of the pro-life movement is what I want to talk about today. And that is coming alongside women in unplanned pregnancies. And so what is causing women when they find out that they're pregnant in these unplanned pregnancies to feel like abortion is the only choice? And then what are pro-lifers doing, as well as what can you do to truly come alongside these women, love them, support them, and help them choose life? And so to have this conversation with me is Natasha Smith. Natasha and I first met each other as we worked together at Summit Ministries for actually 2 summers we worked together. But Natasha left Summit that summer, took a job with Save the Storks, where now she serves as the creative project manager, where she supports the pro-life movement by telling stories through writing, video, photography. And she has co-authored the book with her co-author, Brittany Smith, called Unplanned Grace. And that is what we are here to talk about today. So Natasha, thanks for coming on and having this conversation.
Ryan, it's so great to see you again and to be part of it. Thanks for having me.
I know it was fun. I was the classroom coordinator at Summit. You were the activities coordinator. And so
Yeah,
we were, I mean, I was all the, hey, let's figure out what's happening in the classroom. You were helping make sure they had fun when they left my classroom.
both
But
important roles. Yeah.
absolutely very important because, hey, if they don't have that fun, then they're not going to enjoy the classroom as much. Um, but awesome. So, okay. So let's just kind of start here really quickly because I think it's important as this goal of this show is to help equip Christians to think deeply about Christianity and defend it well and faithfully live it out. And I think that there's an aspect of Christianity that is, in my opinion, maybe often missed. And that is, look, we have all the right answers sometimes, and we can argue for the truth of something, but coming alongside people who are struggling in these situations is often maybe not something we're as good at, or something it's harder for sometimes us to see, especially in the apologetics worlds. It's like, well, here's the argument, right? So we have the intellectual answer to the problem of evil, but how do you help someone who's struggling with evil in their life? We have the intellectual answer for transgenderism, but how do you walk alongside someone who's struggling with gender dysphoria? And then I think that's what the conversation is here. How do we practically live out a biblical ethic, and not only having the right answers when it comes to the pro-life movement, but also walking alongside women who do this? And so I'm just kind of curious, starting with your job with Save the Storks, maybe not an organization that many have heard of. And so kind of what do you do, and how does your job entail coming alongside women in this way?
Yeah, so Save the Storks is a national nonprofit that supports pregnancy centers all over the country. Now, there's about 3,000 pregnancy centers in all over the country, and they support women in such an incredible way. And I've seen that there's a lot of ignorance, I think, as you're describing. We have all the philosophical answers, but then when someone says, well, they're only pro birth and they're not going to care about women, like what happens next? We don't necessarily have a great, apologetic answer for that. But through pregnancy centers, there's actually an incredible practical answer to that. And so in our book, Unplanned Grace, we really wanted to help people understand the practical ways that pro-life helps women. And so I'll get into that a little bit more later. But Save the Storks started by building mobile medical units. So these are beautiful state-of-the-art buses that can provide free ultrasound and pregnancy tests out in the community. So a pregnancy center will own and operate them. We build them, they operate them in their local area. And each center decides where they want to park. So some of them work in really rural communities. There's actually one headed up to Wasilla, Alaska, where transportation is a real issue. And so they can go to some of the villages and provide this necessary service for women. There's others who will park, near abortion clinics and provide women, who have to have an ultrasound anyways, get a free ultrasound. And that actually opens the door to this conversation of, well, why do you feel like abortion is your only choice? Are there other pressures? Are there other influences that maybe we could provide you answers for? Because what's wild is 79% of women who chose abortion say that they never had counseling on other resources if they were to
Yeah.
choose life.
Yeah.
And 73% choose abortion because of economics. So how much could we provide solutions just by meeting people and sitting down and hearing their stories and helping them feel seen and known and loved? Like, it's just a really awesome space for women to take a breath and to meet their child, but then also meet this network of people who are going to walk alongside them, not just until the child's born, but up to 2 years, typically after birth, where they provide an Earn While You Learn course where they can get diapers and wipes, formula, all these material needs, and also coaching on how to parent, how to care for themselves, how to budget. There's just so much that
Right.
they provide for women, and that's just often unknown. So Save the Storks comes alongside pregnancy centers to help them serve their clients more. So it's a little bit separated from the woman herself, but we ensure that those who are caring for her are a thriving organization and able to meet women where they are through the buses.
Yeah, and I think that's important, kind of pointing out again, and we'll talk about this, is like 2 years after. This is not just you give
Mhm.
birth, now good luck, figure it out. Now, Save the Storks is an organization that I love and just want to share with people, and it also helps because they're based out of Colorado, right? And so one of their
Yeah.
shirts is a Colorado flag, of course, something I always want to sport. So of course I had to wear my shirt today.
Yeah.
When you match an organization I love with my state flag, I have to have that. So now you mentioned the buses. I want to actually pull up from your website kind of a picture of the bus, and I'll share this with you so you can kind of see what everyone has to see. But I think it's when I tell people about these like buses, it's like, what do you mean you get on a bus and you get an ultrasound, and like maybe they don't know what that looks like, and I want people to see like what this looks like. So here's an example inside a stork bus, right? Where like this is a Mercedes van, correct?
Yeah, they're either Mercedes or Ford. We've kind of shifted from Mercedes more recently, just because it's easier then for pregnancy centers to get what they need, as far as repairs go. But yeah, we make a 24, 25, and then a 37 and a half foot mobile unit. So there's different
Yeah.
sizes depending on what the pregnancy center needs. And every single piece of material in there is the highest grade medical quality material that we can get, so that when she boards this bus, she instantly feels safe, comfortable. She knows that this is a space designed for her. And so many women have said like this blew them away, because
Yeah.
even this showcases a value on them. That pregnancy center found that woman valuable enough to invest in something like this so
Yeah.
that she could get this care.
Yeah, you look inside these things and it's just amazing. It's kind of what women are invited into in that space to have these sort of conversations. Now, you mentioned in your book Unplanned Grace that all of the stories you share, I think, happened on one of these stork buses. Is that
Mhm.
right? Yeah. So, kind
Yes.
of walk me through kind of now the book a little bit, and then we'll talk about the reasons that you get into there of what is kind of your purpose for you and Brittany to sit down and to pen this book, Unplanned Grace.
Mhm. Yeah, so the inspiration for the book happened because for a few years I was traveling around and visiting pregnancy centers and was just amazed at the quality and also the quantity of support that they provide to women that is just largely unknown. I didn't even know that, and I grew up in a church. My dad's a pastor, and all of those things, and yet I didn't know so much about this care that's available. And that's just true. I've seen that across the board. A lot of people just simply don't know, because if you haven't had an unplanned pregnancy, then you don't probably know about the local pregnancy center. Or if your church isn't actively involved, you may not know about that. And so really wanted to raise awareness to the incredible work that they do. But in my work as well, I got to meet a lot of women. I was doing testimonial videos and sitting down with these women who felt like abortion was their only choice until they walked on the stork bus. They met their child, which so often they didn't realize that it was going to be as developed as it was. Maybe they waved at their moms, and it humanized that unborn child and helped them then realize, like, oh man, this is a life. But even beyond that, sometimes that isn't enough for women because their circumstances are so hard and they can't find joy in that moment because they can't have the capacity even for themselves. They're trying to survive. And so that's where the pregnancy center rallies around them. And there's often a nurse and a social worker on those buses. So that social worker can hear like, okay, well, what's going on in all of, all the surrounding pressures that's a part of your story right now? Is it housing? Is it pressure from your parents or your partner? Are you facing some kind of, you don't have the financial security that you really want at this time? Well, here are ways that we can come alongside you, get you safe housing, get you out of abusive situations, whatever it might be. And then that provides a margin where they can finally breathe for themselves and realize like, oh, there's actually hope for my situation. And that also then gives them capacity to think outside of their survival mode to care for those children. Because really in these stories, I keep on seeing like the mama's heart's there, with 73% of abortions happening because of economics. That tells me that a lot of people care about providing and they feel like they can't right now.
Yeah.
And that's just such a beautiful place for the church to step into, where we could actually be a part of caring for, okay, well, we see you, and how can we help support that so that abortion doesn't have to be the next step here. And so throughout the book as well, we have a call to action for the church. Like every chapter ends with this devotional of like, okay, can we shape our hearts to reflect our Father's heart for the world? What does he say about the homeless? What does he say about the fatherless? What does he say about those who have done things that they regret and they can't go back, but yet he comes to meet those who are weathered and worn and need hope and healing. And that is such a beautiful place for us to be involved in and to invite God to shape us so that we can care for those who are vulnerable around us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's such a beautiful thing that is happening that is just, many people are just not aware of it happening. You often hear this argument of like, well, if we shut down Planned Parenthood, like where are these women going to go? And you mentioned earlier, I think there's something around 3,000 pregnancy resource centers, which I think if the numbers, if I remember off the top of my head, is like 3 times the number of abortion clinics or something. And they're not getting, they're privately funded, right? Individuals and churches giving to these places, offering completely free services. Is that correct? Like how are these pregnancy resource centers functioning and supported in that way?
Yeah, it's incredible. Yes, you're right. They are totally funded by donors. A few of them might receive some government funding, but that's a very few. And they support their centers, their communities in so many ways. There was one study that the Charlotte Lozier Institute put out where they found that a pregnancy center saves their community roughly $250,000 every year.
Yeah.
Because they provide all of those services for free, the diapers, the wipes, all of that is, donated by locals in their community. And so that's huge. And so the churches really need to be able to support pregnancy centers so that they can serve these women and men and both the unborn and the born children throughout their future. So yeah, that's a huge thing. And that's something that Save the Storks also tries to do, where we support pregnancy centers build up more of a sustainable donor relations and all of that so that they are truly able to provide for their communities. And it's so inspirational to see those who are doing this well. And I've had the pleasure of meeting so many centers that are they just give and give and give. And there was one center in Grapevine, Texas, that said, honestly, if you look at it from a financial standpoint, we're the most unbiased people in this conversation because we don't get any money from a woman's decision. And in fact, we have to give out a lot of money.
Yeah.
It costs us if she chooses life, and we think that's worth it. And I think that's a really interesting point, for us to think about, is the fact that there's one side that makes a lot of money off of a woman's choice. There's another side that is willing to give so much to women, men, and children to help them thrive because they really believe that their life is worth it. And I think that kind of showcases a little bit of where true empowerment lies.
Yeah. And you talk about this idea of being unbiased. And I remember reading in the book, right, where one of the stories that was shared is a woman who boards a stork bus and starts kind of talking through kind of her options and seeing what her available options are, ends up choosing to have an abortion,
Mhm.
but then goes back to the Pregnancy Resource Center and they say, we understand, here's counseling, here's our options still for you. So it's not just like, oh, you chose abortion, get out the door, we don't care about you anymore. But you chose abortion, now here are the services now we still have to provide and to support you. It's not only we support those who choose what we want you to choose.
Right. And it again showcases how pro woman they are. They care about the health of women. And I love that. And many pregnancy centers do offer that. And churches are starting to start this as well, of having these Bible studies or healing classes or retreats, through their church, which we want to call churches to do because it's so needed. And I mean, just think if there's over 60 million abortions that have happened, double that number, and that's how many individuals today are dealing with some kind of repercussion. And there's so many people that I've met and we've heard that just say that they think about that every day. And we should be places that are extending this hope of healing, that the heart of Jesus is for us to be whole and made whole, and not to allow our past and shame to define us. He can redefine us.
Yeah.
And pregnancy centers offer that extension. So I do love that story so much because it showcases that they care about women no matter what their decision is. And I think it's also powerful that that woman felt comfortable enough to come
Right.
back to that center and to acknowledge that she hurt. And I wonder, where else in our culture do women who do feel that sort of hurt or remorse, where can they go? Because
Right.
they're told that, it's a good thing. And so where can they go if they realize that there's a pain? And we really want to have that compassionate expression because there is so much of that. And we also want to bring men into this conversation because that's often forgotten, is that abortion affects them as well.
Right.
Just recently, 2 weeks ago, I was at a conference where a pastor came up and he said, well, I preached on this last week, actually, and I shared my story. And he had contributed to an abortion when he was 20. And he went through, some great healing classes through a church. And he said it took a lot of time for him to be able to talk about it because it's such a hard thing. But he preached on it. And he said a man who was about 70 came up and just wept on his shoulder and said, I've never told anyone about this. And yeah, I think about this every day. And so again, like the reality is so deeply entrenched in our culture. And we want to help shine the life and light of Christ into even the broken places of our past so that people can come to a new place of healing and wholeness in Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I just want to kind of point out, because you mentioned this in a small scale, I think, as you were talking about community, but in the book, you talk about how pregnancy centers provided almost 2 million people with completely free services with an estimated cost savings of $270 million a year. Right. So again, this is like, how do we not encourage this work more, especially at a government level? It's like, wow, this is saving taxpayers and other people $270 million a year. This is amazing. And also, like, again, I kind of mentioned to my students today, because we're talking about other things in one of my classes, but like Christians often aren't like, right, we're not boasting about how much money we're giving away. And it's like, here's how much I tithe, here's how much I give to this organization. And so I've kind of been accused of like, well, what do? You just argue about God all the time. Like, why don't you do something actually useful? And it's like, well, we're not obviously always posting, here's how much money with a big check, here's how much I'm giving away. And so it's important to kind of recognize, like, these are privately funded, church funded pregnancy resource centers that are giving out on average about $270 million a year, or saving the community about $270 million a year. And so, Gma Joe, the question is, what's the name of our organization again? It's Save the Storks. Save the Storks. And I think it's often a joke, but I've gotten the question of like, what's happening to the storks? Like, why do these storks need savings? And I've had it, and I've heard it being told, and I've had it to me where it's like, no, this is actually like storks bring babies, and so when you save a stork, you're saving a baby, and they're like, oh. And then they're a lot less interested, which I think also shows like part of the cultural attitude of people are more interested in saving storks than they are saving human beings. Right.
Yeah, it's wild. But the image of the stork is the one who bears the child.
Right.
And so that's really the focus, is how can we help those moms,
Yeah.
because they need help.
Absolutely. So one of the things you mentioned in your book then is kind of getting to what this is kind of a nuanced conversation, right? It's not just as easy, and we want to make the case, philosophically, that this is a valuable human being, that abortion is wrong. But at the same time, when you're dealing with individuals, there are factors that lead them to think that this is the only option, or to maybe not consider, or to go, well, I know it's wrong, but I have no other choice. It's something I have to do. Maybe like, stealing is wrong, but if I'm stealing to feed my family, sort of thing, like then all of a sudden we start justifying decisions. And so you mentioned kind of three reasons that are kind of the three biggest factors that lead women to think that abortion is their only option. So if you could maybe kind of mention the three, and then we'll kind of work through them a little bit, talk about what can we do, and what our pregnancy resource center is doing to kind of help these. So what are the three main reasons?
Yeah, so we kind of compartmentalize the book into these three sections of economics, and all that goes into that, the housing, if they're unemployed, all of that, the health concerns, and then I'm blanking on the center one. Sorry.
The relational pressure, and then holistic health. Yeah. Yeah.
It's been a little since I read it, but so the relationships and all of those are really important factors, and probably the largest, pieces that weave together in a women's decision. And what stood out to me because I met probably about half of the women who I feature in the book. And if you go to unplannedgracebook.com, you'll actually be able to watch some of the videos of women whose stories are featured in the book, which is really cool that you can, see them telling their stories. But what I found with them that really stood out was just the fact that so many women truly felt like they were the victim of the circumstances. And I don't think we often think about that on the philosophical or the, theological debates. We don't realize that women really feel like they're a victim of their circumstances, and that they don't have other options. And so it's a decision out of desperation, that there's just nothing else. And it's interesting because I know I mentioned this before, but 73% choose it because of economics. And that's a stat that Guttmacher, which is a research arm from Planned Parenthood, admits. They recognize that the economic standpoint is a major contributor. So it's interesting when we put things into to political categories. We're pro-life, or we really care about eliminating poverty in America. We might forget the fact that they are actually interlinked. And that can provide a bridge, between the parties, of saying, like, okay, we recognize that poverty and abortion really do seem to go hand in hand. What's wrong with that whole picture? And how can we help break that cycle that women are captured in? Not that, abortion tends to get people caught in a cycle, because it doesn't release them from poverty. It doesn't get them out of abusive relationships. It doesn't change the pressures that she's feeling. But when we're supporting these women holistically and helping raise them out, it really truly does change their lives. So that's a big feature. And then the pressures. There was a stat recently that said about half of women who had abortions say that they did it to make someone else happy. Just think about that. And they're afraid of losing their partner. Or they also found 73.8% admitted to feeling pressured. And that pressure might be, it might be from the partner. It might be from parents, especially with minors. Or it can be from culture. I mean, just think about the cultural narratives that are pushing on people to do whatever they want, but it's not an open, access. It's like, whatever you want, but I'm going to push you towards this one decision. So it's not actually fully caring for women. There's one lady that her story isn't in the book, but I met and did a client testimonial with her where she wanted the child. She actually planned to have the baby. And then her dad pressured her mom to pressure her. And she went into the abortion clinic, and the nurse actually in the abortion clinic said, "It doesn't seem like you want to be here." She said, "No, I don't," and that allowed her to actually talk with her mom. And then her mom changed changed her opinion and was willing to say like, oh, well, I didn't realize that you wanted this. But that girl for that moment just felt so pressured that she didn't have another choice. So that's just, it's so real, and it's so sad that so many feel these pressures and they don't know where to go to maybe talk to someone else, a different opinion. Or there's genuine fear of personal safety.
Yeah.
That's a reality too that we discovered in one chapter on domestic abuse. That's really tragic, that there is unfortunately a skyrocketing of abuse for pregnant women. Well, that's not a good thing, and abortion doesn't fix that. So how can we maybe find a different solution that helps men understand how to value and treat women? That would be more pro woman and empowering for everyone to have healthy relationships. So there's just so many different nuances that kind of come together in these decisions, but then also so many different avenues that we could be a part of helping make a difference.
Yeah.
It could be mentorship of young men who don't have dads. It could be caring for women in such a way that they know they could come talk to you,
Yeah.
and that you would be a kind and not shameful voice in their life. And then the last part that we talk about in the book is just the health concerns. What happens when a doctor gives a prenatal diagnosis and suggests abortion? That's a hard thing to stand up against. When they say like, this child is going to die anyways, so you might as well not like go through the trauma. Like, that's hard. That takes a lot of bravery to stand up against that. And yet so many people have, and their children were born normal, or they, were born and had to go through a lot of surgeries. And we feature a story of Matt Hammett, who now works actually at Save the Storks, but he's the former lead singer of Sanctus Real. And his son was born with half a heart, and they were told to abort, and they wouldn't, and now his son is super healthy, and they travel and sing together now. And it's just a really precious thing that, his life was hard at the beginning, and he did need a lot of surgeries, and it was a trial in many ways, but now he is thriving, and his story matters so much. And every little life matters, whether it can live, a long time or a short time. And so it's that's a hard pressure. And then we also go into, fatherhood and how men matter in this conversation, as well as, well, what happens for healing if abortion was chosen? And there's so many opportunities for healing and redemption, and just, the Father transforming people to overcome the pain of our past, and for God to make all things new.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of want to work through these a little bit, because I think there's just really cool things that are happening that people need to be aware of. And even then can, as we talk about at the very end of like, how do we then as Christians like take part? Like, what action steps can we do to kind of join in on this? And you mentioned this twice now already, that 73% of women say they choose abortion because they feel that they cannot afford the baby. And I've been trying to figure out how to formulate this into a question ever since I read that. I don't know if I figured it out. So hopefully what I say makes sense. But it seems odd to me that if this is why they're choosing it, right? If they want the baby, but they feel like they can't afford it, and so they're choosing not to have it. It seems like if someone is desiring something good and they're in an economic situation where they cannot get the good thing they desire, that we should want to help them get that good thing that they desire. Right. And so we do this with college. We do this with things. Right. So there's scholarships, and there's things that we try to come alongside and say, hey, look, college is a good thing. You can't get it. We want to try to help you get it. And it seems like kind of the pro-abortion side is like, well, you can't afford it, and and this is why you're choosing it. So let me just help you kind of not eliminate the problem, but eliminate the desire, eliminate the cause. And so therefore you don't have to worry about affording it anymore, rather than saying, look, you want something good, and we want to try to help you get that something good, rather than just eliminate the good thing. Therefore you don't want it anymore because there's no more option. And it seems like, how is that the loving option, to come alongside someone in an economic situation, and instead of helping them achieve the good thing they're desiring, to just destroy or eliminate the good thing? say, all right, now you don't
Yeah.
have the problem anymore. I don't know. But so
Mhm.
I love then reading this section and seeing how pregnancy resource centers are coming alongside and actually doing exactly that, saying, here's a good thing you desire. You're not in an economic situation, so let me help give you some resources. And so I was even talking to one of my coworkers today, and when I said, and they said, okay, what do women do? Where do they go? And there's unheard of. So what kind of happens? Maybe what is a little bit of the process of someone Google searches, researches? How do they know where the pregnancy resource center is? And then once they get there, what are some things that are happening that provide the economic support for those who are for the 73% of women choosing
Mhm.
abortion for this reason?
Yeah, so often women will Google and they'll find an ad perhaps of the local pregnancy center. And of course, everything's free, so that's often a attractive feature. They don't have to pay for the ultrasound, especially because abortion clinics will charge for that, and you have to have an ultrasound for an abortion. So that is a helpful tool for a pregnancy center then to meet with women who may feel like they don't even know of a pregnancy center or what they'll provide, but they like that free ultrasound. And so there, not only do they have those resources for free, but often there's a social worker who will walk alongside her and sit down and listen to her story and understand what are all the different features that are causing this to be a hard decision for you. They'll also walk through every single one of her choices. So they'll talk about parenting, pros and cons, because everything, no matter what, her life has changed. So pros and cons of parenting. Here's pros and cons of adoption. And then they'll talk about abortion and the different procedures of abortion, because a lot of women are not informed about the risks of abortion and even what the process is, which I find very disturbing
Right.
because it's a medical procedure and all the risks and potential side effects of every other medical procedure except this one. So that causes a lot of question marks. So these pregnancy centers will walk through all of those with women, not in a fear-based tactical, kind of way, but they're just trying to say, like, okay, here's what this will entail and here's what's going to happen. No matter what you decide, you should be fully informed of what you're choosing. So with parenting, they will talk through all the different local or federal resources that might be available to that woman depending on what her circumstances are. So if she is unemployed, they'll try to help her connect with ways to get stability through that season. There's one organization that we feature that I just love their system. It's called the Continuum of Care, and Human Coalition is a network of pregnancy centers that operate in this way, but they have this continuum of care that's going to go even further than those 2 years, where they really walk alongside women to get that economic stability. And one of the ways they'll work on resumes together. They'll even take women out, go shopping and get a new wardrobe so that she, looks professional for her interview. They'll practice interviewing. They just really help her develop the skills that maybe she's never been taught before. Likewise, they teach budgeting and stuff like that are very practical but necessary for life. And where else do you have that? If a woman wants to go back to school, there was a story of one woman I met who's like, I just really want to go back to nursing, and I thought I couldn't if I had this baby. And they helped me find scholarships so that I could, as well as affordable childcare. And so that woman was getting her education and now thriving as a mother. And it's like, why do we think that abortion or children stand in the way of achieving dreams? They don't have to, but that's a narrative that our culture has been promoting a lot. And I think that's devastating
Right.
because then it robs so much joy. I mean, you've got a little one, it robs you of just so much
Yeah.
joy that is part of your life that you wouldn't know otherwise. So that's a big piece. They will just walk alongside them, and then the pregnancy center will do the work in connecting women, whether it's getting them on WIC for a season so that they've got the food that they need, or the various safe housing, affordable housing, getting them connected to insurance, whatever. They will do the hard work to help these women get the help that they need.
Yeah, and I just again, love seeing this practical stories of women talking about what this looks like. And if I remember right, one of the stories in the book was like, each question I had, that I asked the Pregnancy Resource Center, they came back with 4 different options and then all of the
Yeah.
contingency plans for each one of those options. And it's like, there's
Mhm.
no shortage of information and resources to where they came alongside these women who had nothing, and they were able to go through the whole process, give birth, have everything, and it cost $0 to them. And it was, in fact, even cheaper than having the abortion, because they would have to
Yes.
pay for that. And so just such a cool, cool thing. Now, you also mentioned, I guess earlier, and I forgot to mention it, but this idea of like, sometimes just helping women find out about these things. And again, one of the cool things about Save the Storks is the bus is they can go anywhere. And one of the stories in the book is one of the girls sitting in the waiting room, I think, of a Planned Parenthood abortion clinic and starting to express her doubts and concerns. Maybe I'm not up for this. And the security guard of the abortion clinic, overhearing the conversations, walking over and saying, "Hey, sorry, I heard your conversation. It seems like you have some concerns. There's a van out in the parking lot that'll give you a free ultrasound, and I'll walk you out there myself if you want to go out there and see what some other options are," or something of that nature. And that's when she saw the baby, because it's hard to see that ultrasound and not choose and not recognize what is truly in there. Now, the other thing I think you mentioned, and I was just having a conversation with my wife about this the other day, is you mentioned there's no other medical procedure that's done where the patient is not informed of what is about to happen or something of that nature. And I was asking the question, is there another medical procedure? Like, is there anything equivalent where you go in for a surgery and the doctor does not tell you what they're going to do? Like, I couldn't think of one. And it's like,
No.
what would happen if all that was made, by law or something is just to say, here, you have to explain actually the process of what's going to happen. And you have to,
Right.
tell the patient exactly what is going to happen. It's not just removing a clump of tissue. You actually have to explain using medical language, like you do any other surgery, what you're about to do, so that the patient can make an informed decision. Because, I mean, I'm curious in how many stories that you're hearing, and women that you're talking to that are in abortion clinics and then going to stork buses and hearing a different side of this. How many are there some that feel deceived or something, like the information is hidden from them, that they're not actually making informed decisions?
Yes, and that's what's so tragic, because that is super demeaning, to
Right.
women, to not tell them the truth, as if like they can't make a good decision for themselves, especially in a world that claims my body, my choice. Why are you limiting information to women on this choice? That's very strange to me.
Right.
There's one story that happened in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which that has one of, I think, the country's busiest late term abortion clinics, like all the way to birth. It's tragic. And their bus was the pregnancy center's bus was nearby, and there was a woman who went inside, and like she just couldn't go through with it. And she came out, she wanted to see the ultrasound, and what they showed her was just like this, mass of nothing, like a little bit of white, but there wasn't any form to it, or whatever. So they really made it look like it was just, a clump of cells, nothing. And she goes out, and like she didn't feel right about it. So she left and went onto the stork bus, and they realized that they had actually zoomed into the femur of the baby and just showed her a zoomed in portion of bone, but not actually the full child, because this was again a later term, abortion clinic. So you definitely could see, the nose and the fingers and all of those features of the child, but what they showed was deceiving to her. And she had, at least enough like intuition to know that something was off, and to get the full picture, which then of course made her change her mind, and she chose life.
Yeah.
So in a question that claims to be so, or in a world that claims to be so pro choice, why is there so much pressure toward just one choice?
Yeah.
And that's a question I think we would do well to think on.
Right. If they really want that choice to be open, why not give both possibilities, both options fairly and equally, and present them and let the woman actually make the choice? And yeah. So comment came in from Slammerin. Thanks for that. As she says, actually, informed consent is already the law. They just do not do it. And so again, so, whether, you have to give that information and it's just not happening, how do we actually make this something that is taking place like it is with every other procedure. So there's a ton of resources that is saving communities tons of money, taxpayers money, all this kind of stuff that is helping women remove this economic pressure to where they can now begin to choose what they want to choose. You also mentioned this idea of relational pressure. So what are some of these resource centers doing to kind of help maybe empower women in a sense of to stand up against the pressure and to deal with that sort of issue, thinking they have to have an abortion because of the pressure?
Mhm. Yeah, so they will talk with women about what they're feeling. And there's actually this great material that is created by CareNet, which is another national pro-life like umbrella group. They partner with lots of different pregnancy centers, just like Save the Storks does. But they have this magazine that pregnancy centers will often use called Before You Decide. And in that, there's this whole worksheet of like, here are the reasons why I'm feeling this way. And pressure is one of those points of like, where do you feel any pressure? Is the father supportive? So they might not say, is someone pressuring you right now? They might just say, what does the father say? Have you talked with him? Because that's also an interesting stat. I think it's over 64% of women say that the father of the child was the most important voice in her decision. And so if he's not supportive, or if he says, oh, I'll support whatever decision you decide, I'm placing all of the responsibility on her, that can feel like pressure. Additionally, if there's any sort of economic or housing reliance on someone else, whether it's a partner or parents, that can be used to pressure women, saying, we're going to kick you out if you choose life. You're going to ruin your life. That sort of thing can really be detrimental. And of course, the economic piece we've discussed already. So all of those things can be manipulated in such a way that they, pressure women to make a choice. But a pregnancy center will listen to those and then provide solutions. So if there's domestic violence or anything like that kind of abuse, whether it's domestic violence or abuse in any capacity, they will talk with women about that and connect them to organizations that help women out of abusive situations. So there's maternity homes, there's national therapists who will work with women to like find healing and get out of those places. And likewise for parents, there's letters that are created, and the name escapes me, but it's in the book of letters that kids, minors can provide that say like, I don't want an abortion. My parents are forcing me into this. If you do this, there's law that will, come in and stand for my rights here, because that is a reality. That sometimes we even have a unfortunate story of people in the church who said, well, we're going to kick out our child for having, an unplanned pregnancy. And then that is a pressure to that girl. And she ended up choosing abortion because she's like, well, I'm already a failure. So and it just plummets her life until eventually she does find healing and hope in the future. And so, there's a lot of nuance to that for sure. But pregnancy centers really try to hear their stories and make sure that those women feel safe, because that's a huge piece to this.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing I love about just a lot of work that is taking place is, and one thing I encourage my students in, and we talk about the, Christian ethics and applied to things like politics in different areas, is like solutions are often best solved right with the people on the ground, because you understand the story better. You understand what people are going through, and then you can actually offer the help that's needed, right? And if you don't understand someone's perspective, if you don't understand kind of what they're going through, and you just okay, for example, like, okay, you can't afford gas. Well, it seems like the most loving thing to do is give them gas money. Here's a gift card for gas station, but it's sitting down and saying, okay, so why can't you afford gas? Oh, if you found out, well, they gamble away their money every paycheck. Okay, well, the gas card is not the most loving thing. We need to talk about budgeting. We need to talk about not gambling. There's other things that need to happen, and so it's easy to kind of just throw money at something or throw an easy fix solution at something. It takes a lot more work to sit down and have these sort of conversations and start actually creating better habit rather than it's like, here's a bunch of money. And it seems like,
Yeah.
again, that is what a lot of people are willing to do, that then those of us who don't have the time to do, we can say, hey, here's some money. So you can do what is truly good for these women.
Yeah. I wanted to add one more thing that I forgot to mention before in that list of how pregnancy centers help is a lot of them are starting to have men's ministry as well. And that's a key place because again, if he's the loudest voice in her life, what can we do to really empower men to be supportive and to welcome that child and to, co-parent or marry? Obviously, we would hope that there would be, a biblical view of family established and those people would come to know Jesus and be connected to the church and all of this stuff. And so some pregnancy centers are doing incredible work on that front of welcoming men. So when the woman is having an ultrasound, guys are being consulted with other men mentors who are willing to walk alongside them for years to come. And there was one pregnancy center I did a mini documentary on last April in Alaska where they offer their community 600 different classes. And they actually work because Alaska has a lot of child abuse issues. And so they work with the court system, and men will come to the pregnancy center to get classes on fatherhood and how to care for their children, how to discipline well in a healthy way. And they just said, none of the clients that they've had dads. No one knew how to be a good father. Like that's a serious issue. And that's so a core of it like undergirds this whole conversation is the breakup of the family and people not having healthy men, fathers and moms in their lives. And so this pregnancy center is making a difference there by caring for the men and helping the men get connected to mentors and being connected to the church. And they walk alongside these guys there were some that were 5 years in and still meeting together. And they were like, I think every guy should go to a pregnancy center because this was great, and it was just really cool to see these guys being like, I had no clue how to be a dad. Yeah. And that's, I think, part of the story is terror. What do I do? I don't know. I haven't had it modeled. Yeah. And so the easy way out is, an abortion or just to say, you do whatever you want, but I'm not going to, tell you what to do.
Right.
But if we can support fathers to be the men that they're called to be, that also can make a huge and lasting difference in our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can't help connecting this with within the kind of the apologetics conversations of the time I've been told of like, okay, I get all the reasons and the arguments for Christianity and maybe believe that it's true. But if I become a Christian, I've had people tell me my friends will stop being friends to me, or my friends will treat me differently, or my parents will disown me. And so there's just so many different areas where we recognize that we may recognize truth and still not follow it because of these other pressures. And so to kind of dismiss that from this conversation, and again, that doesn't mean we throw out truth and just only come to this relative understanding of just understanding people's perspectives, but it's bringing truth into that. And so the truth is necessary, but bringing it into that. And so we talk about these different kind of reasons that cause it. And I think that this has kind of been underpinning everything we've talked about this whole conversation. But to kind of really touch on it specifically, and maybe if there's anything else you want to share on it, is just the value and the importance and the need for empathy for women facing these things, rather than coming at it from this like, well, this is a life, clear, abortion's wrong, don't do it. But how can you maybe speak into this value of empathy for women facing unplanned pregnancies?
Oh man, that's such a good question. It's such an important point. I mean, because honestly, I feel like throughout my work at Save the Storks, God has definitely shaped my heart to be so much more empathetic than I was naturally, because man, these stories are so hard. And it's easy to get caught up in well, I know what's true. But when you hear a story that has so many layers of trauma or so many layers of, pressures that are all stacked up against you, what do you do? And that's also where I love connecting to, if we want to be theological, why don't we look at scripture and see how Jesus interacted with women? Like he went out to those who are vulnerable, who are ostracized, who had, questionable pasts, who, other people judged, and he saw them as people and he stopped and he listened. And that is where we can start, is by stopping and listening, because so many people just, like everyone is telling them what to do.
Right.
Very few are listening. And that's what I love about pregnancy centers. And that's also what we want to help encourage any reader, any pro-life person. Can you sit down with someone and just listen and hear why they feel like they don't have any option? Because maybe your heart would break for them, because there are so many factors that play a role in our lives and how they shape up, and crazy things that have happened that were outside of our control, or maybe choices that were promoted because that's what culture promotes. And then we realize, like, oh, there's actually a wake of devastation that follows. What do I do now? And so that is, yeah, it is so important. But we can start by listening and hearing people's stories, not to preach at them, but to listen with that heart of the Father. And that's why we wove that in throughout the book of, like, okay, what does Jesus say to the woman at the well? What does he say to the woman caught in adultery? What does he, how does he interact with the people in his own lineage who had trauma? And that's what's amazing, is like Jesus didn't see it so appalling that he wasn't willing to actually weave it into his own story. When you look at his grandmas, the 5 women in Matthew's genealogy all had hard stories. When you look at it, it's like, it kind of blew my mind when I realized it was like Mary had an unplanned pregnancy. She didn't see that coming. And yet, how did God interact in that story? Maybe we can learn from that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wanted to touch on that specifically because I was heartbroken one time. I was at a certain event. There was someone there speaking on pro-life issue, and students asked a very specific question of how to respond in a certain situation, and the speaker responded just very flippantly, like, "Oh, well, that's a silly response because clearly blah 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 blah," and just very intellectually, very flippantly, and the students walked away very upset. And often we go, oh, see, they don't understand. They're not on our side or whatever. It's like, no, these students were on your side. These are pro-life students, but because there's no empathy, because there's no understanding, like, of trying to understand what this person's going through, it's just very flippant response. It really made them have kind of this distaste in their mouth, I guess I could say. And so it was like, I saw that interaction take place. And it was like, man, that's a bummer. Right. And it's just so sad to see those things kind of happen. So, wow. So in our last we got 9 minutes left. I would love to kind of talk about this, and you kind of started alluding into it in that answer as well, of kind of some practical steps of taking action. I know one of the big things is kind of equipping the church and equipping Christians to really jump into this. So maybe like on an individual level first, and then maybe we'll talk maybe in a bigger level what churches and larger groups can do. What are some very practical, simple things that the average Christian watching this show, just the individual, can do to kind of jump into this pro-life movement in a deeper, maybe more impactful way?
Yeah, the very first thing that we say throughout the book and what I believe is true is by prayer. It's for the Lord to shape our hearts, to invite God to shape us to reflect who he is to the world around us. That is where we can all start right now, because the world certainly needs more Jesus. And if we can be his ambassadors in a more true way to who he is, like, man, that can change our world. And that is changing our world, because all of these women's stories in the book were transformed by people who reflected the heart of Jesus to them. And so praying. And if you don't have words, that's why we actually have prayers in the chapters of, like, okay, if you don't have words, may these words help stimulate, your conversation with Jesus of, like, God, how do I care better for the brothers and sisters who are suffering with homelessness or violence, or they're being pressured? Like, just shape my heart to care for them as you do. So prayer, I mean, that is huge. My dad's a missionary, and he would do this charge, and this kind of helped inspire this, where he would tell people, like, the battle's won on your knees. It's not by picking up swords or, and spears, or writing nasty quotes to each other on Facebook, or, whatever. That's not how we win. It's not even by, like, changing laws. It's by changing hearts and minds. And that actually provides a greater stability for our future. So that. Another thing is to connect with your local pregnancy center. Find which one is closest to you. You can Google it and find which one is near you, and then go check it out. Take a tour. They would love to show you the work that they're doing. Perhaps you could volunteer and just start raising awareness to your own circle of influence of what the pregnancy center is doing, and connecting them with your church. That's another huge thing that we want to see, is start building that network so that when a woman comes to a pregnancy center, not only does she get all those resources we've talked about, but she could get connected to your church, where she would then have a family who would support her and care for her. And so that connection is very strategic and very important, so that we are really inviting people into the family of Jesus and caring for them well and making sure that they don't feel alone, because that's a big influencer in abortion, those who feel scared and alone. So if we can meet those needs, that's huge. And then also, we really want to help the church get more active. So Save the Storks has been building new curriculum so that churches can, start small groups where they discuss unplanned grace and these ideas. Or we have a 30-day devotional, which you can find on the YouTube YouVersion Bible app, or we have it in print on our website as well. It's called Reimagining Pro-Life, 30 Days with Save the Storks. And that just helps reshape our heart and minds. We want more churches to do that. And in addition, we also are partnering with an amazing documentary called The Matter of Life. And we would love for you guys to watch it and for churches to host movie nights where we talk about the matter of life. It's an incredible film that we supported. We didn't create it, but we are supporting the organization who did. And it just walks through the history of this whole conversation, prior to Roe versus Wade, and then all the way through the present, and talks about all these different nuances that play a role. It's very informative and really, really great. So if you go to savethestorks.com and our website and go to the church page, you'll see all of those different factors that we're suggesting of how churches can get better involved. And we just really want to see people rise up, and especially the church rise up, because there's 300,000 churches in America. There's 3,000 pregnancy centers. So if every church partnered with the pregnancy center nearest them, man, we could be doing a lot of incredibly, good work. And especially as we move into the question mark with the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Supreme Court case that should be passed down in June, the church needs to be ready to respond. No matter what the decision is, there's going to be a lot of work that needs to do. And so we want to see churches get better equipped.
Yeah. That was part of a conversation I had today, is does the church have the resources, so to speak, if we kind of put more pressure, right, when it comes to just any of the social kind of safety net issues, right, of homelessness and food needs and poverty and all that kind of stuff, can the church support that if the government kind of slowly were to back out of it? And it's can we start creating that, so to speak, that foundation to where hopefully we're moving further in that direction rather than going further away. So, that is some great, helpful stuff. Well, Natasha, man, this has just been so fascinating. I have loved reading the book. I'm going to continue reading it. I wasn't able to finish, as I mentioned. I'm going to continue because it's been awesome. I want to encourage everyone to get it. Again, you've shared a lot of resources. Unfortunately, right now, I don't have it in the description below. I got busy today, but they will be there soon. If you're on YouTube, in the description below shortly, all the links and everything that Natasha mentioned will be there for SaveTheStorks.com as well as UnplannedGraceBook.com. Is there anything else you want to mention as far as resources for people as we finish up here?
Those are the two main big ones. Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Natasha, thank you for coming on and just sharing this just incredible stories and just testimonies of people that it's going on and what's actually taking place. I know it's been encouraging to me, and I hope it's been encouraging to others. So just thanks for taking the time to share this.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's been a delight to talk with you.
Yeah, and thank you for doing what you're doing and putting in the hard work of meeting with these centers and working with Save the Storks as well.
You're welcome. It's been an honor.
All right, everybody. Well, again, lots of resources are going to be there. I encourage you to check it out. Unplanned Grace book, and get it there. Next week, there's going to be a conversation. We're switching topics on biochemistry, and looking at kind of the design within biochemistry and how that points to a creator. So a fun conversation with Dr. Fazal Rana next week. You can have that to look forward to. I think it's on Tuesday. Other than that, there's tons of other videos that you can check out here and great resources for you to go to get better equipped to stand up for the unborn. and to faithfully live out a Christian worldview in this cultural moment. So encourage you to continue checking out other resources that are going to pop up to further be equipped, as well as get the resources mentioned here to equip you in this specific area. And share this with family and friend. Get the word out there of what is happening, what churches and Christians are doing and supporting these pregnancy resource centers that are supporting women in unplanned pregnancies. So with that, I'm going to be signing off. Continue to think deeply about God, Christianity, and Jesus, because they are worth thinking about. See everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your week.